Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. If you can, please keep your camera and mic off so that we can have as productive a session as possible. We're just going to allow a few minutes for everybody to log in. And thank you all for your patience with the registration process. Apparently, there was a little glitch and it's asking you to register again. So thanks for your patience. All right, we'll give it another 2 minutes maybe, and hopefully that will resolve the delay in the registration. All right, I think 10:05 will be our magic number. According to me, that's about 30 seconds
Sounds
to a
good.
minute away.
Mhm.
And I promise everyone we will end on time, if not a little early, depending on how active you all are in Q&A, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all very, very much for your patience with the login process and for joining us today. I know for a fact we have a few others joining us, but we'll see how and when they log in. My name is Julie Manley. I'm the chair of the board of the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute. We are opening today's session. It's our first in this new webinar series we're calling the Wood Residuals Innovation Series. And today we have Luca Pandolfi from Woodland Biomass Innovations with us. So thank you again, and I think we'll just jump on to the next slide.
Sorry, let me get that. There you go.
A few logistics, just to let everybody know, this session is being recorded. Um, We will keep cameras and mic off at all times unless you're invited to turn it on. Please use the chat function at any time throughout the entire event. If you have questions, submit them as they go. If it's a good fit, Luca may take it in stride, or he may wait and choose to do that at the end of the session. Miffy staff or Luca will specifically call on people to ask the question if it's appropriate. And then if you have any issues at all during the webinar, you can try during using chat, but if for some reason you really even can't even get in or you lost connection or sound, email or institute@mifme.org or text me directly at 815-325-4974. That might even be fastest for response. And this may sound funny, but if you lose audio, sometimes hopefully you hear me now, so that's a really good sign. But sometimes Zoom has an issue, and the best way to fix it is literally to log back in. So I will just share that right now. If you have an audio problem only, just try to log back in. You do have the opportunity to also use your phone or computer for this event. So if in the event you're having a problem on one of those, try the other. So with that, we'll jump to the next slide. Um, just a touch on MIFB. Michigan Forest Biomaterials became a nonprofit institution back in 2016. Our mission is to catalyze innovation and use of materials from forests for a healthy economy and environment, with a vision of a carbon neutral Michigan advanced by a sustainable forest economy. We are a small but impactful organization. Our board has representation from various government institutions, Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, Michigan Department of Natural Resources, various, I might be forgetting some, so I apologize, academic institutions, as well as other nonprofits such as the Nature Conservancy. So we do a lot by convening cross sectors, and we try to really, what I'll say is shift the tides of something that might be fairly stagnant and you think you can do it alone, but we bring the right players together to hopefully shift things into motion and make things happen. So we see a lot of these challenges not just as a Michigan challenge, but also as a global challenge. And we work on things globally to find solutions that we can apply locally. So with that, I'll shift gears to the next slide. Sharing that wood residuals has been a challenge that we've been looking at for a few years. We just hosted the first Wood Residuals Summit in May of this past year, which was very successful, as you can see. But it was cross-sector. We had people in that room that literally said, I've never been in a room like this before. We bring together people that it takes the entire supply chain and value chain to change and create new markets. And that's, in this case, that's exactly what we do. So we put people in a room that probably have never met others and trying to break down those barriers. So with that, we don't think this problem is addressed. We see this as the start of the challenge. So while that was a summit and incredibly successful, we wanted to move on and keep things moving. So one of the things we did at the event was we had a variety of companies, startups pitch. We wanted to continue in that vein, and every time we see a new technology that has relevance to wood residuals, we don't need a summit to bring them forward. We need to bring them forward as quickly as possible and get them in the hands of people that can apply them. So hence the generation of this series that we developed. So next slide, please. This is the Wood Residuals Innovation Series, as I said, with the real goal of expanding markets for wood residuals. And we're bringing these innovations to you as fast as we can. And that's why we're bringing Luca today. Next slide, we're going to jump into the agenda. As I said, brief introduction. Honestly, Luca gets most of the floor today, and that's our goal. This isn't about MIFB. This is about bringing these new materials and technologies forward. So he will get most of the floor. There will be an active Q&A session. So again, use the chat when you want at any time, but be ready to ask your questions at the end. This is for you as much as it's for him. So it's really about getting this information out there. We'll do brief closing remarks and conclude by 11. So with that, I'd like to introduce Luca Pandolfi, the founder of Woodland Biomass Innovations. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie, for having me today. Excited to tell you guys more about our project. As Julie said, we're kind of focusing on the wood residual market to start out with, so a very good fit for this program. So I can jump right in here to the presentation. I usually like to start off giving a little bit of background on the problem that we were trying to address when we built Woodland Biomass Innovations. So what we're looking at here is how we produce fuel today, how we produce gasoline in particular today. It's a very linear process. So we're extracting fossil fuels from the ground, we refine it, we distribute it to market, and then when we burn it in our engines, we release CO2. Throughout the process, in fact, we release CO2. And the issue has always been that we don't have any process for recapturing that CO2. So again, going to a linear process, you're leaving a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere at the end of this and no plan for how do we recapture that CO2 or how do we use it for producing the initial product. So when I was in college, I was trying to understand, is there a way to close that loop, right? Is there a way to take the CO2 that comes out of the tailpipe at the end? Oops, sorry, let me go back there. The CO2 that comes out of the tailpipe and reintroduce it into our product to use it as a feedstock for producing the gasoline. And that's where we found forest residuals as our intermediary product, basically. The idea, the theory of what's happening here is if we can use wood residuals for producing gasoline, then the carbon that's released at the end of the process, the CO2 that's released when you burn the gasoline, would be recaptured when you regrow the material that you used as a feedstock, in this case, wood. So we go into a forest, we remove a tree. The bulk of that tree, the saw log, still goes to a sawmill. It's not that we want to divert any of that high grade material. We still want that to go into your tables and your chairs and all the other great things that we make out of wood. The idea was that the secondary products, the leaves, the bark, the small diameter stems, um, any other pulpwood that was left over could be sent to our process, and we would be able to convert that into gasoline, 87 octane gasoline to be specific. One of the key features of what I wanted to produce here was that the gasoline produced by the system had to be chemically identical to what was already on the market. We already experienced ethanol, and that was, while it's worked to a certain degree, we have 10% ethanol at the pump. The issue is that we can never get to 100% ethanol. We would need to retool engines. We would need to redesign the actual engine of the car to run on 100% ethanol. This is a very expensive endeavor. It's near impossible to do on a large scale where you're asking billions of people to switch their engine or to retool their engine to be able to use a different fuel. So it was very important from the beginning that we produced a gasoline and not any other kind of alternative fuel, that this was chemically identical and could be used in existing engines. Um, and so that's what we developed here. So, you kind of still have the circular process. You burn the gasoline in your car. It's not that we invented a magic gasoline that doesn't release CO2. So the CO2 comes out of the tailpipe. The difference is that because we used forest material, forest residuals to produce that gasoline product, the theory is that as long as we're doing it at a sustainable rate and the forest is able to regenerate at a sustainable rate, that the amount of CO2 released at the tailpipe and the amount of CO2 captured by the regrowth of the material should balance out and should get us closer to something like a carbon neutral fuel. Now, we're not going to be 100% carbon neutral on day one because we're using diesel to move the material from the forest to our facility where we can actually do the conversion. So that's the majority of our emissions when we start operation is going to be from the actual transportation of the wood to our facility. However, our facility right here, the Woodland Bio facility, is where the actual magic happens. So I'm sure right around now you're wondering, how are you doing this? What is the magic that's allowing you to convert wood into gasoline? Oops, sorry, didn't mean for that to be next. Let's instead look at this flowchart diagram, which shows exactly kind of how we handle material and how we move material through the process. It starts with the pickup of material. As I said, this is residual material, so most of the pickup's going to be done by logger operators who are already out in the forest. And the idea is that they can take any secondary residual materials and they can bring it to our facility, and we're actually paying them for that material. So we're providing a stable market for those residual materials. Part of what we've been doing over the last few years is negotiating long-term supply contracts with local logger operators. So this facility is being built in northern Pennsylvania, just along the border with New York State. So we've been working with local logger operators in that region to define a delivery schedule and pricing for the delivery of material. And we're locking in that pricing for multiple years of the supply contract. The idea here is that for the logger operator, this is going to provide a stable, reliable income because we know exactly how much material we need day after day for operation. So this system here in Tioga is expected to consume around 1,000 wet tons per day of woody biomass. In reality, what the system is fed on is dry biomass. So the real number is actually 600 dry tons per day that the system runs on. So depending on how recently it rained, it could be 1,000 tons, it could be a little bit more, it could be a little bit less. So that's why we like to measure more in dry tons because it's a more definite number. So we need 600 dry tons, more or less 1,000 wet tons per day of material delivered to the site to keep it running. The system is designed to run 24/7 without interruptions. And so it is really important for us that we have this supply part of the equation locked down because we cannot be shutting the systems down because of a lack of material. And that's where our storage comes in. You can see here we have the biomass storage. Idea is to have have about 30 to 60 days worth of material stored on the site at any given time, so that if there are interruptions in the supply of material, we can continue operating while we get those logistics up and running again. The material then from storage is funneled into our primary process. So the primary process is here on the right. It uses a combination of two technologies. Some of you might be familiar with them. The first one is called gasification. So gasification invented in the the mid 1800s in England, where the first gasifier were built. It's basically a giant pressure cooker, high temperature, high pressure, oxygen starved environment. Instead of combusting in this environment, the wood turns into a product known as syngas, stands for synthetic natural gas. So when they first did this in London, they gasified coal, and they used the syngas that was produced from that process to run the famous London street lamps. So if we all remember Mary Poppins with the guys dancing around the gas burning lamps, those weren't actually burning natural gas in most cases. They were burning syngas produced from coal. So that was the first application of gasification. It's obviously been expanded since then and used for electricity generation. So nowadays, how we light the streets using gasification is more by burning the syngas, running a turbine, generating electricity, and then using the electricity to turn on our lights instead. So you have a few power plants scattered around the world that are using that gasification technology for electricity generation. The second technology is called gas to liquid, abbreviated to GTL. So gas to liquid does exactly what the name implies. It turns your combustible gases into liquid fuels. Invented during World War II by the Germans, particularly because they had no reserves of liquid fuel in Germany during the war. So they needed to figure out, how do we turn our sources of solid fuel into liquid fuels that we can use to run the German war machine. And so that's where they started looking again at gasification technology to produce syngas, but then they needed a second step to turn the syngas into a liquid fuel, that basically a crude oil product that could then be broken down into its various components and used for running tanks and planes and all the other great, well, terrible stuff actually that they were running back then. But the name of that process was called Fischer-Tropsch. So that's still around today. You'll still find Fischer-Tropsch systems that are being built or in operation, that are converting various types of gas materials into liquid materials. Now, the big innovation that we're doing at Woodland Bio is we're not actually using Fischer-Tropsch. Fischer-Tropsch to us is a little bit outdated, and there's a new generation of systems on the market that are a lot more efficient. And one of the advantages of these newer systems is that they don't, instead of producing a crude oil product, they produce a finished product. So if we used Fischer-Tropsch, we would produce crude oil, and we'd need to partner with a refinery who would be able to refine the synthetic crude oil into gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. However, the new generation of technology can go directly to the finished product. So there is no further refining required in our system. We go straight from woods to the finished 87 octane gasoline that's ready to be distributed to market right there at our facility. So that produces our first and primary stream of material, the gasoline. That's what majority of what our revenue comes from and our profit come from, is the gasoline, sale of gasoline and the associated credits. We do need a fair amount of electricity to run this process. So the idea is to generate our own electricity using material that we already have on site. With the idea being that when we don't need it on site, we could keep the system running and sell extra electricity back to the grid in the form of renewable electricity. Both the primary gasifier and the electricity generation system then produce a co-product known as biochar. I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with biochar. You've probably heard stories about it over the last decades. But essentially, it's a pure carbon, very similar to activated charcoal in terms of the product. I have some here, in fact. Here's a little piece of biochar that I have. So it's very similar. You can kind of see flaky, similar texture to what you'd get with coal. And one option is that you can just keep burning biochar like you would coal, and you can generate more electricity out of it. But we don't like that idea, because the other things you can do with it are much more environmentally friendly. So some of the big, notable things for biochar, you can put it in various construction materials, whether that's steel or concrete, and that sequesters that carbon. So it actually acts as a carbon sequestration device and helps bring down the overall carbon impact of the entire process by sequestering the biochar. The other one is more in agricultural applications where it can be used for fertilizer production and other types of agricultural products like that, including used as a feed amendment with for cows and other. And actually, you can also use it as bedding with chickens as well. And it has a variety of benefits when you use it in those applications. So, this isn't a biochar presentation. I don't want to go too far into the biochar conversation because again, it's fairly well known at this point, at least within the this kind of forest residual space. I want to stay focused on the gasoline because that's really the big innovation that Woodland Bio is bringing to the system. Oh, so here I have some pictures actually of the history that I was talking about. So first one here, actually, this is a wood gas car from 1946. Believe it or not, but actually, I think it was like something around 50% of vehicles in Germany and in Russia at one point in time were running on these gasifiers because they liquid fuels were so expensive and rare, and so it became more and more common to try and find a way to run your car on wood. We're not, you might be surprised to find out, we're not the first people to come up with this concept. What they did in this case, though, while we're building a giant gasifier at our facility, they put a small gasifier and they welded it onto the back of the car. That's what is at the back of the car here. And then they had a pipe that was bringing the syngas to the engine that was retooled to run on syngas. So instead of producing liquid fuel, they put the gasifier on the car. The issue with this approach is that there would have been a warm-up period. These guys probably would have had to take like 45 minutes to an hour to warm the car up and start the gasification reaction before they could actually before the car would actually move. And then also how much torque you would get with this kind of a system is very questionable. Um, so not the greatest approach, but it kind of proved the concept of we need alternative fuels to run our cars. Nowadays, we do something more similar to what happened to Fulcrum, what they did with Fulcrum in Nevada. So not a great project. This did actually fail, this project here, but I do like to use the image because this is the closest visually to what you can expect the facility in Tioga County is going to look like. The issue with Fulcrum is that they tried to start by processing trash, like municipal solid waste, which is the most difficult material to process. So the system ended up failing because they got a lot of contaminants into the system from the trash that ended up destroying some of the primary equipment. Um, we're reducing the risk compared to what they did there. Very similar design, but just by switching to a wood feedstock and using wood residuals as a feedstock, we're significantly reducing the risk on the project compared to what they tried to do out in Nevada. Sorry, I'm going to skip around a little bit here because this presentation, I'm kind of free flowing here, so I'm not giving a rigid presentation, but kind of flowing as is natural. So this is our biomass wheel. And the reason I bring this up after talking about fulcrum is because we designed this wheel in order of preference. So at 1 o'clock, wood is the simplest, easiest material to process. We know how to do wood today with the technology that already exists, and that's why we're starting with wood at the first system. However, the idea is once we've proven out the wood system, we can start to work our way clockwise around this graphic onto other materials in order of difficulty. So the next material to work on would be agricultural residuals, animal waste, sewage after that, vegetable oils and animal fats. And you can see what our very final destination on our graph is trash. So just to compare us to fulcrum, we aren't going to be touching trash until we've understood all of these other materials and how to process them. It is the very last material we will ever look at is trash. In the meantime, though, we're just focused on this wood market because in Pennsylvania, in particular, we have hardwoods forests. So about 90% of Pennsylvania forests are hardwood, naturally occurring hardwood. And the beauty is that when you're looking even within wood, hardwood produces less tar when it's gasified. So out of the wood spectrum, hardwood is actually even better than softwood for our applications. And that's kind of why we're starting. Well, one of the many reasons we're starting in Pennsylvania is that it's a very hardwood rich state. So just by taking whatever materials available, we're going to have a high hardwood concentration. We're not saying exclusively hardwoods. We're allowing our suppliers to bring in whatever they have easily available. However, we will naturally get a higher hardwood concentration in Pennsylvania than in other states. Once we know we can do it with hardwoods, then we can start working on developing systems using a higher and higher concentration of softwoods as well. So one of the key, going back here a little bit, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but going back to this slide here, actually, a lot of what we were trying to figure out when we were designing this system is we can't just produce gasoline that works with existing vehicles. We have to do it in a way that's price competitive. That's always been the trick of trying to do biomass to fuels, is that you need to meet the market where it's at. We can't just produce a gasoline and sell it for $4 or $5 per gallon and expect the market's going to go along with it just because it's a sustainable product. We have to be able to sell it at a price competitive, in a price competitive way with fossil fuels if we really expect the market to adopt the product. So a lot of our focus when we were designing the Tioga County facility was on scale and making sure we could hit the right price point to compete with gasoline. So the system in Tioga County is expected to produce gasoline for around $1.68 per gallon. That's this number here. You can see how that's broken out on the left here. Majority of that is our feedstock. About 65% of our expense of producing the gasoline is just buying and transporting the wood to our facility. Labor and all our other expenses really make up a minority of what we actually need to spend our money on, around 35%. And so that's where you can see in the future, as we get to larger scales and we're able to maybe drive down a little bit the price of the feedstock, then you could have this go even lower. But for now, that is the majority of our expenses, the feedstock. So $1.68 is what it costs us to produce it. So as long as we're making more than $1.68, our system is profitable. Now, gasoline, for reference, at least here in Pennsylvania, I'm not too sure how it is in Michigan, but in Pennsylvania, the price of gasoline is usually about $1 below what you see at the pump. So lately, the price here at least has been hovering around $3.50 per gallon at the pump. So the wholesale price is around $2.50 per gallon. And so you can see when the market conditions are right, the system is already profitable just off of the revenue from gasoline. However, on top of that, we do generate as well credits. It's called RIN credits. They're issued by the EPA. It's a program that's used heavily for ethanol today, but it does apply to any fuel that's produced from renewable feedstocks. And so the RINs are estimated at a value of around $2.14. So you can see how between our gasoline and our RINs, you're looking at about $4.64 in revenue per gallon on a product that costs us $1.68 per gallon to produce. And so you have some pretty good margins there when you include the RINs, the credits, and that's what allows us to kind of expand the system. We're going to be reinvesting those profits essentially in building more systems once we've built the first one. So the idea here is really to generate a self-propelling business model where we can finance the first one and build the first one, and then use the profits from that one to build the second and third and fourth that come after that, and expand the production of gasoline. To distribute the product, we've actually signed a letter of intent here in Pennsylvania with a company called Shipley Energy. They're an energy distributor who works across Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and New York State. The RINs are at a federal level, by the way, just for that question I just saw came in from Donna. And so, yeah, we're working with Shipley on distributing the product. What we're producing at that system in Tioga County, 42,000 gallons per day is what's being produced in Tioga County. That represents roughly 0.4% of Pennsylvania, just Pennsylvania's demand for gasoline. So approximately 40,000 households that you feed from this one system. So really, to start wrapping your head around the scale of the problem, we're talking about 250 of these systems just in Pennsylvania to feed just Pennsylvania's demand for gasoline, not even looking at other products like diesel, aviation fuel, and not even looking outside of Pennsylvania. So this should really help us wrap our head around how big the problem of transportation fuel is, how much we consume today, and kind of how unrealistic it is to switch all of that to electric vehicles. I am not against electric vehicles. They make tons of sense in certain scenarios like dense cities. However, to think that we're going to change this entire massive market on the time frame that we need to address climate change is unrealistic. And that's part of why Woodland Bio exists is we need to provide alternative solutions, right? EVs are great. Let's get as many out there as fast as we can. Everyone who can afford one, get one, please. And if it works for your lifestyle. However, there's a lot of people who it doesn't work for. And for those people, we need to have another alternative. And that's where sustainable gasoline comes into the equation to help feed this market. So hopefully we'll see this market start to shrink a little bit as EVs take more of the market. But at the same time, we also need these alternative fuels to come up and help feed this market because it is absolutely mind-bogglingly massive how much fuel we consume. Um, Excellent. Thank you, David. Yeah, exactly. That's right. We've been doing this for 4 years, so we've heard a lot of questions at this point. So we know a lot of kind of what probably is going to come up, but I appreciate your feedback there. Um, so yeah, that is the scale of the market. That is where there's tons of potential here, though. It's not that we believe we'll be the only company doing this. We believe we're going to be setting a trend here, proving that these technologies and these systems can work as designed. But we hope that there's going to be a lot of companies internationally that start doing this so that we can start addressing this market in a timely manner because it is absolutely so big. It's hard to wrap your head around. Um, so to make sure, so what might come to your head as you start seeing how big the market is and how much wood we would need to feed this market, your head might start be going to, can we do this sustainably? Is there enough wood in Pennsylvania or even in the world to be able to feed these systems sustainably? Well, first, it doesn't have to just be wood. That was the point of the biomass wheel that I showed earlier, is to say that when we reach the maximum capacity of what we can get sustainably from the forest, we can start working our way onto other materials that are widely available. So it's not that it all needs to come from wood, but even with wood, what is our carrying capacity? How many of these systems can we build in Pennsylvania before we exceed the capacity of the forest to sustainably regenerate? And that's the subject of our research that we're doing in conjunction with Penn State University and Pennsylvania's Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. So this is a dual life cycle analysis looking at the carbon impact as well as a feedstock sustainability research. Those are the two angles that we're focusing on for this research. One, what's the carbon impact of our fuel compared to fossil fuels when we're using specifically Pennsylvania products? Because we have general numbers. The general number is about a system using our process. The research indicates that it's about more or less a 2/3 reduction in CO2 emissions compared to fossil gasoline. So you can expect about a 66% reduction in CO2 emissions using our gasoline versus fossil fuel gasoline. But those are general numbers that were made about sustainable fuels, broadly speaking. The research we're doing with Penn State and DCNR is focused on our process using Pennsylvania hardwoods. So we're getting a lot more detailed on the results of that study to what we're doing. The other part of that, as I said, is also the sustainability of the feedstock, looking at how many of these could we build without exceeding the capacity of Pennsylvania forests to regrow material, and making sure that we don't exceed that carrying capacity. So we're very serious about the sustainability part of this. We don't want this to be a greenwashing program where we just say it's sustainable. We want to have the data and the research to back up that claim and make sure that we're being responsible stewards of Pennsylvania's forest at the same time. So then I guess we get on to how do we make this happen? How do we get from where we are today to the point where we actually have a production facility in Tioga County? Because it's not an easy road. We've been working on this. So I did the initial research behind this when I was in college. So that was in 2013. I ran the 2013 Ithaca College Business Idea Competition. That was my first taste of entrepreneurship and success, was winning that competition. And then I rested on the project because I knew it was massive. I knew we had to build a big facility, and I knew that at 22 years old, no one should trust me with that much money to do anything. And so I went to work for other companies for about 6 years, get some experience, learn what it's like to work for bigger businesses, as well as other startups. And it was in 2019 that we sort of returned to the project and we started developing everything that you see today. So it's been a very long road to get to even where we are today, and we still have a long road ahead of us before we actually get to production. Just to give you guys an idea of, how complicated this is if you're thinking this is something you want to do in your own region. So in 2019, a lot of what we started doing was what you see here is phase one. This is essentially an engineering process. We did not invent the process. It's called FEL, front end loading study, is what it's called by the engineering community broadly. It's broken up into three phases. So the first phase is feasibility. That's what we started working on all the way back in 2019, where we started identifying our technology suppliers and our equipment that would be used at the facility. We started developing those relationships with the suppliers that I mentioned earlier, the logger operators that are going to feed the system. We secured property options, so we identified and secured multiple property options to build the first facility. And we used all of that data to build out our conceptual model, which tests the performance of the system both financially and from an engineering perspective. Then phase one feasibility was completed around the end of 2023, 2024, early 2024, essentially. And then for 2024, what we were doing was really focusing and into early 2025 was raising the capital that we needed for phase two validation. Because the important part about phase two is that it can't be done by us internally. To validate the design, we need to hire a third-party engineering firm to confirm the design of the system and all of the work that we did in phase one. So we needed to raise outside capital, and that's what we did during 2024 and the very beginning of 2025 was we raised just over $250,000 to finance phase two validation. Some of that money came from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, who gave us a grant to finance that work. The rest of it pretty much came from the Tioga County community. The area where we're planning to build the first facility invested in the project, and we had a variety of angel investors essentially come in from the community to finance that phase of work. So in this work, we confirmed the engineering design of the system. We did a site evaluation to evaluate the sites we had selected and decide on which site we want to move forward with. That includes a traffic study because we're talking about 50 to 60 truckloads per day of woody biomass dropping off material. So we need to make sure we can do that safely. And that ends with pre-permitting where we get an initial rubber stamp from the county to say this design looks good, you can move forward with final design. We're now looking to raise around $3 million as our next tranche. We have a few commitments towards that. We're hoping we'll be able to close this financing round in Q1 of 2026 so that we can start phase three execution engineering, expected to take about 6 to 9 months to complete. This is where the engineering firm does detailed designs and construction drawings for the property that we've selected. While the engineering firm is working on that, our team is building community support and doing town halls to make sure the community is bought into the event, because all of that is then needed to secure our permits at the end of phase three. Phase three ends, we have permits in hand, we have property in hand, we have construction drawings, we have everything we need to build. So that's where we get to our construction phase down here. Construction is expected at around $250 million. If you were waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes to these projects, there it is. It's the construction cost. It's the capital cost. All of this sounds great in theory until you get to that construction cost. It is very expensive to build these systems, and you need a lot of capital up front to build them before you even generate your first dollar of revenue. And so that is really the big challenge here because we have pilot scale systems. We have small systems proving the technology works, but they're not profitable. And they never will be because they're too small and they're not designed to run continuously. This is the minimum scale to do a profitable commercial scale operation, and it's $250 million. Now, that's not completely unrealistic. There are funds that exist specifically for this type of project. Some of them are more on the nonprofit side of things, like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which are trying to fund innovative energy production. And then there's also federal programs like Department of Energy has low interest loans. There's a variety of other programs at the state level as well that we can apply for. The rest of it's going to need to come from more of a traditional bank. So we're going to need to take out construction loans to actually buy and order equipment. That would come from more of a traditional bank potentially. Then you're also going to be looking at private equity investors, larger private equity investors that could come in at that phase as well. So really that's the difficulty here is the financing. It's why we don't see these all over the place, is you need to do them at a certain scale for them to be profitable. And that scale is fairly expensive and large to build. So yeah, it's basically that's I'd say one of the biggest challenges here is financing. It's not technical, it's not can we do it, it's can we pay for it. Um, so with that, I think that's pretty much. Oh, here's a list of our supporters that we work with locally in Pennsylvania. I think I just had one more slide that I skipped over earlier showing our team quickly. I'll review that. So obviously, I'm the founder and CEO, came up with the concept in college, as I said. My co-founder, Rich Bohr, comes from an extensive background in the energy industry. He used to be with Dominion Energy, PG&E out in California. And then he finally made his way over to Pennsylvania, where he got integrated into the Marcellus shale industry before joining Woodland Bio then in 2020. Matt Tafazi, our CFO, extensive background. He's a CPA he's worked as CFO and controller for a variety of energy and manufacturing businesses, including several years with Corning Incorporated. Chris Wilcox, also a CPA. He is local in the Tioga County community. He has a long history and a lot of connections inside the Tioga community, and so he really helps us navigate that community and make sure we stay in their good graces. So that's the team that's bringing this all to life. And with that, I think that's all my slides. So, we'll end kind of with questions here at the end. So for site selection, the minimum size is 50 acres that we need for the site. So that's our first requirement is the acreage. The second requirement is access, road access. Actually, those two are interchangeable. They're both top priority. We need to make sure that we can get 50 to 60 truckloads into the site every day. So when we're looking at sites, we're really looking at the traffic potential and trying to locate with other industrial processes where you already have a lot of truck traffic so that it's not net new traffic basically to the area. So those I'd say are the primary requirements. All right. Do we have any other questions here we want to drop in the chat?
If there's someone that would like to, jump on screen and ask a question, you're welcome to do that as well. You don't have to just be hiding in the background.
Hi, Luca. My name's Rich Kobe, and I'm at Michigan State. Thanks very much for that interesting webinar. Um, I'm an ecologist, and one of the things that has been, that we would teach in our courses about forest sustainability is the importance of keeping leaves and fine twigs on site from a nutrient perspective. Do you have any data on that? And do you know, because for example, nitrogen and phosphorus will have its highest concentrations in twigs and leaves, and leaving that material on site would promote the long-term nutrient capital for that site, and probably doesn't, would just add marginally to the biomass for your process. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the least desirable material for our process. So we accept it only in that we have to, in case if they're chipping down, a lot of slash, essentially, it's hard to remove all of that material.
Hmm.
Part of what we're looking at with DC and with the research with DCNR is looking at that nutrient cycling component of it and understanding what's the percentage of material that needs to be left behind to promote nutrient cycling. As you said, the majority of it's the material we don't want anyway. It's the leaves. And so if we can leave those behind, we prefer to. A lot of our strategy when it comes to supply is going to be front loading as much of our harvesting in the winter time as
Right.
possible. And then trying to minimize the harvesting that needs to happen in the rest of the seasons. But that's really the main thing that we can do. The other thing that we do is try to work more with pulpwood, and that
Hmm.
type of material. So material that traditionally would have gone to a paper mill or to a pellet mill, trying to work with that material because that's less leafy as well in general and doesn't have any of those materials that you're talking about. Um, So that's our primary focus, but we want to be responsible in that regard. So that's why we have the research as understanding, do we need to leave 50% material behind? Is it 100%? Can we do, 20? Just understanding what is that threshold of material that needs to be left behind for cycling.
Right. And there's also a fair amount of mill residuals available in some regions. Certainly that's the case in Michigan.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now, see, the mill residuals, the issue is that's a little bit higher grade actually than what we look for. Usually those are clean
Hmm.
chips, and a lot of those mills already have markets for municipal applications like boilers or other industrial processes where they sell their chips. And we aren't trying to divert that market because it is a higher grade product than what we need, and they are trying to charge a bit more than what we want to pay for it. So that's where, and also it represents a very small amount. So some of the sawmills that exist around Tioga County, the amounts we were talking about were like 1 or 2 loads a week that they produce in chips. We need
Hmm.
60 loads per day. So it's kind of like, yeah, we can take it, but it's such a small percentage of what we're going to need, on a daily basis that's almost not even worth the effort of, trying to negotiate that. So that's where we've been focused more on the residuals on the logger end because they have the capacities. Because what's happened in Pennsylvania is we've lost paper mills across the board and pellet mills as well. That was what came in to replace the paper mills, but those have all shut down as well now. So really, you don't have any markets for that kind of mid-grade pulpwood market as well, and we do hope to create to be using a substantial amount of that as well, particularly because it can be stored easily. So that's the idea,
Hmm.
is to have round wood for long-term storage that can supplement if there's a disruption in the supply of chips, that we have the round wood on site that we can chip down and use while we wait for the chip supply to come back online.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. So, let's see. We got here. Is there anyone from the forest products industry on executive committee? I mean, I wouldn't say on our executive committee. So, the Pennsylvania Hardwood Development Council is under the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture here. So they are a part of that state program that supports the development of forest products across the spectrum. That's who we got our grant from. So we got our $50,000 grant th largely thanks to this program and participating in it. We do have letters of support from like Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group is a local group. We have a letter of support also from the National Forest, Allegheny National Forest. We are members of this Pennsylvania Forest Products Association as well. So we are that's pretty much who we work with on the forestry side. And then, as I said, DCNR is participating in our research as well. So we have a lot of really good connections. They aren't necessarily on our executive committee, but we'd call them, advisors on the project or supporters of the project, if you will. Um, all right, is there any interest in feedstock from sawmills? As I said, yes, absolutely. The issue is more just that the quantities are not really there for what we need. So while we'll take whatever a sawmill's producing, it's such a small percentage of what we're going to need overall that we don't spend too much time focusing on it. The one exception to that is sawdust. Sawdust and shavings are not good. We actually have a minimum diameter requirement for the stuff that's being fed into the system. So it has to be over half an inch in diameter. Anything smaller than that would basically clog up the system and cause issues in the conversion efficiency. So we actually have a screening out anything under half an inch diameter before it gets fed into the system. So we do not want any of those sawdust or smaller particulates. We really want the bigger ones. One option in the future is we could pelletize the stuff that's under half an inch in diameter, and then we could use the pellets in the system, but we can't use really fine material. It can cause blockages because the system relies on airflow basically. So if you imagine filling up all these chips with a bunch of small particulates between it, it blocks the airflow and it stops it from converting that material effectively. So that's where we don't like to work with sawdust in particular. Chips all day, bark's fine. It's just, yeah, the sawdust and any fine particulates that we don't want. What form of material come into your facility? Pulpwood, logs, in-wood chips? Do you have to debark? So, basically the main feedstock is dirty wood chips. As I said, we're going to be screening those chips to remove the fine material from it. But anything pretty much you can have in that mix of dirty chips, you can have bark, you can have some leaves. That's all fine. The idea was really we wanted to be flexible for the logger operator to use whatever wasn't going to a sawmill, pretty much. So bark is fine. Pulpwood logs, as I mentioned, we do actually look for pulpwood logs to for long-term storage because we can just store them in open fields without having to build, sophisticated storage containers for chips. Um, so yeah, we are trying to do a kind of broad selection, and you can bring the pulpwood in with bark on. That's fine. We will chip it down with the bark on it too. We did actually do research on where how bark affects our process, and the effect was really minimal. So we can even run on if you have a debarker, if you're a sawmill that debarks your material, you can take that bark that you're taking off and chip it down and send it to us because we can run on just bark as well. I mean, we don't want to run on 100% bark, but up to like 25% to 50% bark is not going to have any serious impact on the performance. Any other questions here?
There was one other question about electricity and biochar. I'm not sure if you got to
Oh,
that one yet.
oh yeah, sorry, I mixed that one. Are electricity and biochar profitable at this scale? Not on their own. I'd say that's always been the big issue of biochar is as a standalone product, it's not really profitable. What makes this profitable is that we're getting gasoline, and the gasoline is what keeps us profitable. Biochar is very much just a secondary product for us. I don't know if I have the slide in here of our, no, I don't, of our revenue breakdown, but just to give you the number about, it's it's 75% of our revenue comes from the gasoline and the RINs credits. So only the remaining 25% that comes from biochar, electricity, and the associated credits. The fact is that we don't have to be profitable on our biochar and electricity production because our gasoline production is so wildly profitable that that's really just an incidental for us. Whatever we get for the biochar, it's a little bonus on top of, the millions that we make from the gasoline. So that's where I think that this has really been the missing ingredient to making biochar and electricity work. If you need to build a biochar operation and be profitable only off of biochar and electricity, we're not really there yet. That's kind of to your point, is like we're not there where you can run a profitable operation off of only those two products. The gasoline is what's profitable, and then the biochar just happens to come out the back end of the system, and we have to get rid of it. So we don't need it to be profitable. We could even just bury that biochar for all we cared, and we'd still be profitable off of our gasoline. So that's really where, yeah, we need the electricity for our own production, and that's more where it's cheaper for us to use wood and convert it into electricity than to buy electricity from the grid continuously. So it works out in our favor when we integrate it into the system as a whole. But if you're asking if as a standalone product, biochar electricity would work, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think it would work at ours, certainly the way we've designed it. So yeah, we're really focused. Again, we have to focus on we're a gasoline company and we're focused on being a profitable gasoline company with some biochar and electricity that comes out the back end. I hope that answered the question. If I didn't, please just elaborate a little bit. If I didn't answer your question adequately, feel free to follow up on that. And while I wait, I'll wait for any more questions to come in. While I'm waiting for those questions to come in, I will. Okay, excellent. While I'm waiting for those questions to come in, I will talk a little bit more about this sawdust part of the equation. I'll talk about another project that happened that was trying to do this exact thing. Some of you might have even heard about it. It was called Red Rocks Biofuels. It was in Oregon, and they were trying to do wood residuals to aviation fuel at that facility. And so what happened there was actually it was an ethanol company. It was a company that was making ethanol using sawdust that said, "Hey, can we produce more than sawdust, more than ethanol using our product? Can we figure out a way to turn our sawdust into aviation fuel, for example?" And so they started developing this project at Red Rocks, using their sawdust feedstock. And you can tell that we were very much in the early days of all this concept because they didn't realize that what was going to happen with the sawdust is it's going to cake essentially. You're going to put in high pressure, high temperature, and it's going to cake, and that caused blockages in the systems, which caused eventually Red Rocks to go out of business. That project raised $300 million through the state of Oregon, which underwrits that investment through bonds. And so the taxpayer of Oregon was essentially left holding the bag when that project failed. So it was a very unfortunate project, but we learned a lot from that on why we don't want sawdust and why all materials are not created equal. So while we can use a wide variety of products, it actually comes down more to airflow. Um, so yeah, sorry, that was just a random story from Red Rocks and why Red Rocks failed and why we're not going to fail, why we learned from their mistakes. But Julie, if you want to close it out here, go right ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that reminder and that refresher. Um, is that a question that come in?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
Arbor Renewable Gas, or so Arbor or something like that, renewable energy, something along those lines in Texas. I don't know if that's still moving forward. That project's website has not changed in, I don't know, 5 years or something, 4 years. So their website's still up, but I've not heard any updates about that project in many years. So I do not understand if it's still moving forward or not.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, as we wrap up, if you can just jump on to the next slide. First of all, thank you, Luca, for all the time jumping in on the questions and sharing as much information as you did. It was incredible to get that opportunity today, and we appreciate it. Um, Thank you to everybody here as well. Just a couple things before we head out. Number one, the USDA Wood Innovation grants are opening soon. Our friends at the U.S. Forest Service have let us know that they expect it to open the week of October 19th. And they're already, at least in the northern region, they're already starting to have meetings with potential parties that are interested. So if you received our recent reminder, you saw a link to set up a meeting with Lou McCreary and Patrick Reppold. So please go ahead and do that if you're interested in applying for that grant. And I guess in the same breath, Luca, while we would obviously love to see these projects in Michigan, at least those projects, at least last year, were roughly $300,000 or up to $300,000 a project. So have you gotten one of those grants?
No, so we're reapplying. Actually, I just had a meeting with Lou the other week. Basically last year was our first year applying, and so I think we made a couple, errors essentially in how we framed. Also, I wrote it myself. So I'm not a grant writer, I'm not a professional grant writer, but at the time we just said, hey, it doesn't hurt to try and throw our hat in the ring and see what happens, even though the timing wasn't really great. But so I talked with Lou, we're going to be reapplying this year. And he said, we should be in a fairly good position this year, given all the progress that's happened on the project to secure one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. They do support engineering projects, and that's exactly where you'll be. So it's kind of an interesting opportunity, especially if it's 300,000 towards your 3 million goal. So, but not to say that anybody else on this call or any others can apply as well. They usually give out several grants, numerous grants. Um, so with that, we also wanted to announce that we have a webinar coming up in collaboration with Finland. It will be in November. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, we see this as a global challenge with residuals or just a lot of the forest bioeconomy, and we like to work globally to solve our challenges locally. So this webinar will be an opportunity to explore market expansion for U.S. businesses into Finland. So if we are currently looking for a few US-based companies to present at that, as well as Finland will be doing the same. So if there's anybody interested in potentially exploring and expanding opportunities in Finland, please give me a call or send us an email at institute@mifb.org. And with that, we'll jump to the next slide and just say thank you very, very much. MIFB is open to membership. The membership fees are incredibly low. I think it's $75 per year for an individual, but because they're prorated right now because membership goes through May. So we also have companies, I think the highest fee for a company might be up to $750 depending on the size of the company. So all that money goes to help us run these types of programs all year long and to commit to continuing to provide these opportunities to you as best as we can. So thank you again, Luca. Thank you to all of those that were able to join us today. And if you know of a company or your company is doing some innovative processes with wood residuals, please let us know. We'll be happy to get you on a future call. So thank you so much. Appreciate everything.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Bye.